hands of a few bureaucrats who could very well be geniuses, though most of the time they usually aren't, the decisions to be made will be held with all the people involved in the service. From customers to producers, from cops to criminals, in short, the market will determine how a police system should be run. But the question may be asked, well, what laws should we really be, what laws will really be enforced? But this question assumes that it cannot be asked under a state-run system. There are literally thousands of laws that you are subjected to every day. Violate one of them, and you should be punished. Well, obviously, that's not what happens. How many people speed, do drugs in the privacy of their homes, jaywalk, drink alcohol while being underage, saw someone drink alcohol while being underage, and failed to report it? So many of you, probably every single one of you lawbreakers in this room. The evidence is staring you, but how did the state do in stopping any of these behaviors? The evidence is staring you right in the face. The same problem, I agree, would present itself under anarcho-capitalism. No doubt about it. What laws to be enforced and how strictly to enforce them will be a problem for every system. But under anarcho-capitalism, there is a simple solution. What would be enforced is whatever customers are willing to pay for. Rothbard's example on this is insightful. Suppose, for example, that Mr. Jones has a precious gem that he believes might soon be stolen. He can ask and pay for round-the-clock police protection at whatever strength he may wish to work out with the police company. He might, on the other hand, also have a private road on his estate he doesn't want many people to travel on. But he might not care very much about a trespasser on that road. As on the market in general, it is up to the customer. And since all of us are consumers, this means that each person individually decides how much and what kind of protection he is willing to buy. Most people who think about these sort of things are in agreement that protection would likely be provided by insurance companies. It is difficult to lay out exactly what will happen in an entire society that currently exists only as a hypothesis, especially one that is designed to be as pluralistic and flexible as anarcho-capitalism. But since insurance companies are in the business to protect or restore property, it is not an unreasonable step to claim that they would provide police services. As a totally unscientific thought experiment, let us imagine what the scenario might be like. As any avid reader of detective fiction knows, private detectives are far more efficient than the police in recovering stolen property. And they're also total badass looking. This is because the private insurance companies hiring these detectives are impelled by economics to serve their customers by trying to avoid paying benefits and thus return stolen goods. It is easy to see that one of the main differences between a state-run and private police, where state-run police who serve society and are interested in capturing and punishing criminals with the recovery and restitution of property as a secondary matter, private police are more interested in recovering private property with the punishment of criminals being a secondary consideration. Therefore, there would be no crimes against society in an anarcho-capitalist system. And indeed, there's no such thing as crimes against society even now. There are only crimes against individuals. By making crimes against society, the government no longer had to restore damages to the aggrieved and thus decided only to punish criminals. There is a long and complex history with many intertwining elements in the study of criminal justice, and time will not permit us to delve into it. However, it must be known that somewhere along the line, the state-run police went from private property defenders and restorers to an armed gang whose sole purpose is the punishment of other criminals. The reason for this change was the notion of crimes against society, for which there was no one to whom property could properly be restored. With our innate tit for tat waiting after suffering attack, the only thing that can be done to punish the criminal, the only thing that could be done is to punish the criminal. However, we have put a check on this bloodlust and have become content to just have criminals rot in jail. But having a criminal rot in jail and sit around in a cell all day does nobody any good. It costs money, wastes viable labor, and does not provide criminals with any disincentives toward their lifestyles, except perhaps for the mild inconvenience of waiting around. In fact, many prisons are now just training grounds for future criminals. Now, many people would likely agree that there is some use to be had in making criminals, or in making prisons. There are certain criminals who should not be released back into society because their crimes are so heinous that they lost the right to live with us. And there are criminals who simply cannot function within society and should just be locked away. But I argue that there's a third reason. I would argue there is another reason prisons exist, and that is the place where criminals work to repay their debt. Since most thieves steal because they do not have money, you know, kind of like the government, it is unlikely that if they stole a TV from someone that they would be able to repay or replace the TV, and plus the price in finding and capturing them just out of their pocket. Therefore, they would have to work off this debt. The place to do this is prisons. Thus, in an anarcho-capitalist society, all prisons would likely be debtors' prisons. In a private prison, where the person has to turn a profit somehow, part of the money earned by criminals in working would go to pay for their living expenses, for prison security, and various other factors involved in running a prison. The other part of the money would go toward the person to whom the criminal owes it. However, aren't I getting a little ahead of myself? Even assuming the police captured a criminal, where will he be tried? That is, what's the nature of anarchic courts? Let us take the easy case of one person, A, being accused of a crime, theft for instance, by another person, B. Clearly, as Locke pointed out, neither should arbitrate the case and instead should choose a neutral third party. This third party in an anarcho-capitalist society would be a private arbitrator. Private arbitrators have existed for hundreds of years and exist to quite an extent even in modern times because government courts have become so inefficient that it is often cheaper and far less time-consuming simply to turn to private arbitration. Let me not underemphasize the serious drawbacks of a monopolistic system that we have now. The exact same problems as having a monopoly of shoes and a monopoly of police services exists for the monopoly of judicial services. Nevertheless, before we start deciding that private courts are the best, are the way to go, in theory, how would they be paid for within a free society? Well, there are several possible ways that I can think of off the top of my head and wrote down here. Individuals could subscribe to a particular court service paying a monthly or yearly premium. The individual could call upon the court when need be. Individuals utilizing far less frequently, individuals using the courts call upon them far less frequency than they might police services and could simply pay a fee whenever they chose to use the court. Possibly the criminal would even have to pay the fee of the plaintiff if they're found guilty. Courts could be hired by police agencies or insurance companies to settle disputes. Or courts could be part of a package deal with police services. Now, whether people will pay for a particular set of laws or for some universal set to be upheld, only the market will tell. Anarcho-capitalism does not answer definitively. Anarcho-capitalism cannot answer definitively whether people would all live under the same rules or whether they would live under a small set of universal rules, with localities deciding how to apply those rules in particular cases. It can only be said that whatever the people who constitute the market wish to have happen is what will happen. It might be objected that if the proceedings are voluntary, which they apparently must be according to our non-aggression axiom, couldn't people simply ignore the decisions made by a court? Well, I suppose they could, but the merchant courts from the Middle Ages down to the 1920s relied solely on ostracism. And boycott as a means of following the decisions of courts. That is, if a merchant should refuse to submit to arbitration or decided to ignore the decision passed down by a court, other merchants took this into consideration when dealing with them. Who wants to deal with someone who will not listen to an objective arbitrator? And anyone who ignored the arbitrator's decision could never avail themselves of these services again. Thus, if you don't want to have no protection against other criminals, don't be a criminal yourself. This logic should strike you as quite sound. It is, after all, a variation on the golden rule, which everybody already implicitly follows. Recall the tit-for-tat strategy that's been ingrained in us over our entire evolutionary history.